Welcome to the Be Well Buzz podcast, your number one weekly source for natural health and wellness. Natural health and
wellness. Welcome to the Be Well Buzz podcast. This is your resident nutritionist, Sean Stevenson, and today we're focusing in on a food that may just be the most dense source of nutrition on the planet. And check out this lineup of benefits. It contains every mineral known, 92 minerals and trace minerals, all aminos. It's actually a complete protein, essential fatty acids, omega-3, 6, 7, 9, polysaccharides, nucleotides. This is a true dense superfood in every meaning word. Now the key here is that it's actually bioavailable. This is not like taking a vitamin supplement where we know that we're not actually able to assimilate a lot of this stuff, and it becomes expensive urine when people are buying all these expensive vitamins and mineral supplements and not actually getting the things that they're trying to get from it. And you're not going to come into contact with that kind of experience when you utilize a superfood like this. And what this superfood is marine phytoplankton. And today we have on Ian Clark, who's the managing director of Activation Products, and he's a definitive world authority on marine phytoplankton. He's literally traveled all around the world gathering critical health information on products from the world's top researchers and development teams. And if anybody's got it, he's got the inside scoop on this superfood, its benefits, and how to use it for the greatest results. So Ian Clark, welcome to the Be Well Buzz podcast.
Hey, Sean, thank you. Good to be here.
Well, we've got some great news. I know you just got back from traveling to the facility, checking out the marine phytoplankton. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a great trip. You know, we've been 5 years in development of, getting everything perfected. And so in the last 5 years, I've had to learn, a plethora of information because I really knew almost nothing when I first ran into marine phytoplankton as a nutrient. I just knew intuitively or in my gut, that there was something very powerful and very special about it. And within a short time of introducing it to people, we saw such a positive impact on people's health that the results began to tell us, wow, there's more to this than what meets the eye. So when I went to the final, I was able to tour an entire wing of a university where they've been researching marine phytoplankton for decades. And they have every strain captured and kept alive, where they have to change the materials every 15 days to keep the strains alive, that they've gone all over the world and gathered all these different strains for different reasons and research projects. And there's full-time staff that all they do is keep that marine phytoplankton species alive continuously. So it was just this huge learning curve, which I don't want to get too deep into that because it's very complex, because what we have is actually very simple, down-to-earth, and common sense. But it was an exciting time because the facility where we grow it is like what I call a James Bond level sophistication and technology. It was just it was a highlight of my life.
Wow. Well, that really brings to question, you mentioned something, you mentioned strains, because there's a tremendous amount of different marine phytoplankton strains that are available. And that's one of the questions that I had personally and want to clear up. There's a specific species or strain of marine phytoplankton that you guys actually chose from marine phytoplankton, the Oceans Alive product, I'm sorry. Is this true, and why did you choose this specific strain?
Well, the thing is, we don't live in the ocean, so we're not a fish. If you're looking at marine phytoplankton as a nutrient, really the primary focus of marine phytoplankton on the planet is to support life in the ocean. And there are thousands of different strains of marine phytoplankton. And people are given estimates of like more than 43,000 or whatever. It's really irrelevant to us how many thousands per se. The only thing that's relevant is, are there strains that are, number one, matching the human nutritional profile, number two, bioavailable, digestible by the human body. And so when the research was started, they went through all of the different types, and there's actually different categories of marine phytoplankton, and then there's the one that they found that actually did match the human nutritional profile, which comes under the Nanochloropsis category. And the one that we have is Nanochloropsis gotatana. And it's a thin cell wall. It has all the nutrients, amino acids, the plant enzymes, the plant minerals, the plant essential fatty acids, all the pigments of the rainbow. Inside each cell, they're all identical. And they are the perfect match for the human nutritional profile. So, that's where the rubber hits the road and we get traction for the human benefit. But when you look at the nutrition in the ocean, and the thing that astounded me the most about marine phytoplankton as a nutrient was that if you were to give a grade 5 student a science project and say, look, we want you to go and discover for us what is the most important nutrient on the planet. In other words, what nutrient would there be that if you removed it off the planet, the entire Earth would die? There is only one nutrient that they would find that would fit that category, and that's marine phytoplankton. And that would mean all the species of marine phytoplankton. If you took it out of the ocean, it's a foundational food for everything that lives in the ocean, whether it be the creatures that are crawling or swimming or even the seaweeds. All of them are synergistically dependent upon that as the source of life, because the smallest nutrient in the world, which is in the ocean, feeds the largest mammal, which is the blue whale. So the largest mammal, depending on that, is life, but everything in between, if you took it out of the ocean, everything would be dead in a few months. If you took it out of the ocean, everything on land would die, because we depend on oxygen to breathe day in and day out, and marine phytoplankton is responsible for 50 to 70% of the oxygen in our atmosphere that we're breathing day in and day out. So we would not survive without that on the planet. And of course, nobody's going to remove it, so there's no danger there. But it's one of those things that stands front and center above everything else, because no other nutrient anywhere that you can think of would even come close to the category that this sits in. So discovering one that fits the human nutritional profile is no coincidence. And the fact that we can harvest it without growing it in the ocean is another thing that we'll talk about in a second, but that's where that one sits.
Now that's fascinating right there, because we grew up with this paradigm believing that trees were giving us oxygen, and that's where the story ends, which they do produce a significant amount of oxygen that we are breathing. We need to give gratitude for that. However, that is a huge insight right there that, in fact, the oxygen that we're all breathing, no matter how far we are from the ocean, the majority of that is coming from marine phytoplankton. And how is that even possible, Ian? How is marine phytoplankton actually creating oxygen?
Well, that was actually discovered from a NASA study, and people can find that on nasa.org, where they went about to find out where, this is one of the many studies they did, but they discovered that because of the spring blooms that are taking place year-round in different parts of the Earth and different oceans, there is so much production of marine phytoplankton in the bloom that it consumes CO2, sunlight, and minerals to grow and proliferate. So each cell is dividing, so 1 to 2 to 4, 16, 256, and so on, up into the quadrillions times quadrillions to the power of quadrillions. In a spring bloom, in a square meter, a cubic meter of ocean water will be trillions, if not quadrillions, of marine phytoplankton. You can see it from a satellite. If you go on Google, you can type in spring bloom, marine phytoplankton spring bloom, you'll see these amazing images. And they travel in these large vortexes because of the way the ocean current goes. Even though these are like between 2 and 5 microns in size from the various different strains, you can see them from the satellite as a solid green mass, and they have almost an iridescent glow of light, because it's like a floating light particle. But there's so many altogether that they manifest as this mass. It's like a huge, huge biomass. So that's producing the most oxygen out of any plant that grows on the planet. Of course, there's 5-6 water on the Earth, in the ocean. So you have a massive opportunity for space or surface area to produce oxygen compared to trees or plants, which are a very tiny amount percentage-wise. That's why they determined, and there was even a report that said it was producing 90% of the oxygen in our atmosphere, but I believe the numbers are more accurate for different times of the year. 50 to 70% is more of the real number, but even anything close to 50%, you take that off, and there's no way that life on land would survive. So that's why it's consuming CO2 and producing oxygen.
Okay. Well, that also lends to the fact that, and I want to clarify this for everybody, that color is an indication of antioxidant variety and concentration. And the density of pigments that are there are an indicator of the density of the phytonutrient concentration. And once you see marine phytoplankton, the Oceans Alive Marine Phytoplankton, you see the density of that green. It is just unbelievable. So I just want to clarify that for everybody, because when we're looking at colors, we're looking at this wide array of antioxidants, this spectrum. And we've got the deepest deep green ever when we're looking at marine phytoplankton. Now, something else interesting was brought up in my mind as I was listening to you, that this particular strain has an incredible resonance with the human body, and to the degree that this marine phytoplankton actually has the ability to be directly used by our bodies as energy in the form of ATP. Now, is this true, Ian?
Well, yeah, it does support ATP, energy in the body, in a big way. Even though there's a very small volume being consumed, the key with that is that it's burning super clean. So a lot of the nutrients we take in, there's a lot of ash and a lot of residue that we have to deal with as waste product. This burns so clean, there's virtually no detectable waste product coming from the consumption of it at a cellular level. So really it's a single cell, which is 2 microns in size, which is 5 times smaller than a red blood cell, being consumed by a single cell in your body. So highly unique in that sense. And because of the amino acid profile combined with the essential fatty acid, it's also got the key to go through the blood-brain barrier, because your body has the innate intelligence to keep things out of the brain that shouldn't get in there. This has the code to get in. So it's feeding the brain first of all, so your body innately knows where you need the nutrition most or where you're most deficient. So it will immediately send that nutrient to the most important place. Once that's replete and satisfied, then it starts working from level to level. That's why we see people, long-term users that will not live without it. They just see more and more positive changes. There's no big flash in the pan where people have this massive, huge, revelatory thing going on. It's just a gentle glow that increases a little bit more every day. And so within about 90 days of consuming this small amount of Oceans Alive Marine Phytoplankton, the body you have a different body you're living in, different level of energy. So you have a deep, deep level of strength type energy that you really have not experienced probably since you were a kid. And that's what I noticed. It just made me feel that youthful energy again, was one thing among the many other benefits.
Now, what you're saying, and I want to clarify this too, is that basically for the people who are, kind of science nerds, we're actually, and which I am, we're bypassing essentially the Krebs cycle when we're eating like a protein food or, a high-fat food or whatever the case may be to try to get energy. Our bodies have to go through this whole process to extract the goodies that we want, the energy that we want, but we're going to be left with a lot of byproducts and residues and all these other things that are going to have the tendency to bring our energy down. So this burns very cleanly. This is used and assimilated directly by our cells is what I'm really gathering here, and that's just fascinating in and of itself. And it's not hitting our system like a really harsh stimulant, like a quote energy drink, juiced or crank or whatever's out there. I see the little trucks driving by from time to time. I'm just like, wow, that is some fascinating stuff. But what this is doing is gently and doing this according to the individual. And that's something else I heard you say that's just really profound, is that the deficiency of that individual. So it's intelligent, basically, is what I think I'm hearing from you, in fulfilling the deficiency or the needs of that person, and then going on to do something different in somebody else's body. And that lends to my question for you about any stories that you have about people's experience with marine phytoplankton.
Right. Well, yeah, to get back to the base of the conversation, that before we get into the actual stories that we've seen happen with people, is that, aside from the ATP production and the energy you get, which is, converting a nutrient to glucose and being used efficiently and not causing an inflammatory response because it burns clean, the main thing that we focus on and that we've learned over the last 5 years is that your body everybody wants to remain healthy. So if you want to remain healthy and you want to get super healthy, you have to have a very efficient self-healing capacity within the system. So there's 4 things that are taking place. Number 1 is DNA repair. Number 2, stem cell production, which is, of course, the most important. Number 3 is glutathione production, the master antioxidant. Number 4 is the human growth hormone production. And from the age of 0 to 21, you're very efficient at that. You're aging one day at a time. You're feeling fantastic. You can really abuse your body during those years for the most part and really get away with it, it seems like. Even though there's a payday down the road, people shouldn't do that. But as they age, then those 4 things become less efficient. So we need to supplement or make sure that we're supplying the materials to the body, minimum the materials, that the body will be allowed to utilize to perform those 4 functions. So, you're talking about a unique individual experience. Well, everybody has a different background, different everything. They've had so many, it's different as every snowflake is different. We're all looking different. We all have different backgrounds and diets and family heritage and genetics and all of those things. So at a genetic expression level, at a DNA level, when you consume something is going to happen at a cellular level. So when people consume it, whatever it is that they have that's causing some malfunction, it could be a deficiency in whatever, causing who knows what, it goes in and the body innately has the intelligence to utilize that nutrient to the maximum possible. And therefore we've had people that had got rid of the glasses. They've gone up, Oceans Alive makes eyesight perfect. And I'd say, well, in fact, it did that for you. That's excellent. But you know what? I still wear glasses. I have a stigmatism in my left eye, and it didn't do anything for that. So obviously, any deficiency that I had is not relative to my stigmatism. So I would never tell somebody, this will make your eyesight perfect. Now, it may improve your eyesight, and you would have to measure that. But that's the beautiful thing about this is each person is going to have an individual experience that they themselves are going to enjoy. And so we get all these different stories. The main one is that people, they'll get back and they say, nothing feels as good as feeling good, and this stuff makes me feel awesome. And the longer I take it, the deeper grounded that feeling becomes, and my body has slowly regenerated itself in various different areas that I've noticed. My psoriasis went away, or my blood pressure is totally balanced, or my irregular heartbeat's gone, or my cognitive ability, my ability to absorb information, compute it, and retransmit it is far superior than it's been in 20 years. We get all of these stories all the time. And so when people ask, and we get this question all the time, if I take Oceans Alive, will it deal with such and such? I've got cancer, I've got diabetes, I've got this, I've got that, is it going to help me? I say, no, that's not what this stuff is designed around. Your body is simply malfunctioning because of some cellular blockage, energy block. It could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be some trauma from previous injury. I don't know. But I do know one thing, that when you supply the body something that fills every nutritional gap, and it makes sure that no matter what your diet consists of, that you're going to get the full spectrum of all the amino acids, the plant enzymes, plant minerals, plant essential fatty acids that are parent oils, right? And all the pigments that you mentioned earlier, the pigments are crucial because that's color and light and frequency. So the energy that comes from that at a cellular level, we all know that there's Harvard science that shows how important pigments are. And the Oceans Alive has every color in the rainbow. So all of those things combined in its original synergistic form is the key, because if we were to look at this and say, let's extract the essential oil, or let's extract the aminos, or let's, all those things, that's where you start to get into a problem, because then you get the human intellect looking at something that is created perfectly in a natural environment, perfectly for the environment in the body, so that your body knows what to do with each one of those things, all in synergy together, never been messed with. Your body just goes, that is so cool, because all of the frequencies of all of those nutrients together inside each cell, all identical, are released for the body to do what it wants, to make hormones or to create stem cells, because we do produce stem cells. We're just not very good at it. You give it the material, all of a sudden the body produces far more stem cells faster. And so people see rapid healing, but it's actually their body doing the work rather than the nutrient, which is the coolest thing of all. So I think it just comes back down to simple common sense. We fill nutritional gaps to the maximum. We don't need a whole lot of them. And it's a slow, gradual process that allows the body to gently bring itself back into homeodynamics and equilibrium.
You just mentioned that, and that's fascinating, by the way, but you just mentioned that we don't need a lot of them. So, and I've enjoyed Oceans Alive Marine Phytoplankton for years. It's been a staple in my life, and I've seen the benefits. But I also know that it can actually throw people off a little bit to see that it's a small thing, you know. But until you actually utilize it and get the experience yourself and get the results yourself, you underestimate it. So why is it that it's not that much required, Ian?
Well, because the body, science tells us now today that there's about 75 trillion cells in the human body. Now, I don't know how they counted them, and I don't know if that's an accurate number, but that seems to be the number that scientific people throw around. In one single bottle of Oceans Alive, in a 1 ounce bottle, there's 10 trillion measured cells. When we first started this, we had some misinformation where they said that the cells were 1 micron. They're actually 2 microns in size, which is 5 times smaller than a red blood cell. But as we had to learn, what we did is we went, look, we got to validate everything. I want to see this myself under the microscope. I want to see the measurements. So 10 trillion cells in a single bottle. 7 bottles later, you've had 70 trillion cells come into your system. So each cell feeding at a cellular level. If you put too much into your body too soon, too much of a good thing is never right. So there's always that there's some kind of a perfect balance that can come in that the body wants to deal with. It'd be like trying to eat 50 beets at once. That would not be cool, right? Or extracting all the nutrients out of 50 beets and jamming them into your system. Your body just goes on overload. And it goes, I don't know what to do with that, and I'm going to get an inflammatory response, because what on earth are you doing? It's like sticking nitromethane into a Chevette. It's not going to work. So what we have seen, and this has been lifetime examples, and I've always been astounded at this, because, when you talk about a small amount, it does throw people off. They go, 1 bottle? What's this going to do for me? I say, okay, 1 drop has enough in there to do some very good work in your body. Just 1 drop. 1 drop of this stuff will have more than half a bottle of green powder. Half a pound of green powder has less nutrients in it than 1 drop of this, because that powder's oxidized, sat around in a bottle for who knows how long. This stuff is fresh harvested, the same as standing right beside the photobioreactor at the fresh harvest point, consuming it right there. And we'll talk about that in a second, about the stabilization process. But to give you an idea, I had a friend. Well, she's a friend now, because we got to know her through some work that she ended up doing for the company on contract. But when I met her, she was referred to us through one of her colleagues, and she's a very, very proficient marketing person for doing retail. And we haven't really entered the retail environment with the product, because it went by word of mouth so quickly through private lists that we couldn't bottle it fast enough all the way through the years. We could just keep up with production enough to satisfy the need. So we never really had to get into the health food stores. And I was sitting with her, and she's like in her late 50s and very cosmopolitan, never does health products, tried a few things in her life but never really vibed with them, and, more medically oriented. She was on blood pressure medication. She was taking stuff for skin problems. She, just different stuff that was happening. She was a bit overweight. But generally considered herself to be healthy, even though she would have headaches for 2 or 3 days at a time. So I didn't really know much about her history. We were talking more in a business sense. And I was trying to give her a download that was comprehensive enough for somebody that really hasn't had exposure to what we know. And after about an hour of telling her the simple, common sense things about Oceans Alive, she got very excited. And she goes, this sounds almost too good to be true. I said, well, no, this is actually true. I said, here, I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you a drop of this in the back of your hand, because I always like to give people 1 drop just to give them a little bit of a jolt about how intensely concentrated this stuff is. And that little drop stands up on the back of your hand. And I said, now, we would not normally have somebody take it like this, because the taste is not the most pleasant when it's straight, and it's supposed to be taken in water or juice, which is very enjoyable. And you consume it right away, and it's painless, and it's actually pleasurable in that state. But right now, I want you to have this. So she licked that off the back of her hand, and I'd sort of prepared her for some kind of a, strong experience. Taste-wise, she goes, well, it's not that bad. I can handle that. And so then we sat and we talked for another 5 or so minutes. And then she stopped me. She said, hey, I've had a dull headache for about 2.5 days. And she said, that my headache is gone. Is it possible that this stuff could have taken my headache away? And I said, well, it may be, but I said, that's just one drop. I don't know. I haven't seen it do that before. She goes, well, my headache's gone. I said, well, that's fine. She goes, well, I'm a very sensitive person, and I'm very careful. Even when I do meds, I don't just take everything that's prescribed. I'll take half as much as the doctor tells me, and I'll see how that feels, and then I might take the full recommended prescription. So anyway, long story short, I left a few bottles with her to try, and I told her, do 15 drops a day like I told most people. Well, she ignored me. She phones me 4 days later. She goes, I've been taking 2 drops a day. She said, I have had so many changes in my body in the last 4 days, I can't believe it. She says, I've had psoriasis on my knuckles for 15 years. It's gone. You know how many times I've tried to get rid of that, and it's gone? Is that possible? I said, I don't know. 2 drops? I mean, how could you only be doing 2 drops? I told you to do 15 drops. She goes, no, I tried 3 drops the one day, and I had to go back to 2. On the 3rd day, I tried 3 drops, and no way, today I did 2, because it gave me too much energy. She says, I told you I'm very sensitive. A week later, she phones me back. She says, I had to get off of my blood pressure meds. They were making my blood pressure go below normal. And she said, this stuff has totally stabilized my blood pressure. I said, are you still doing how many drops? She goes, 2 drops. She did 2 drops a day, and it took her a month before she felt she could increase to 3 drops. So anyway, that's one isolated experience. But what that taught me was that maybe we were making a mistake by telling people to do too many. So we ended up putting on the bottle 1 to 15 drops and let the person themselves personally experience and read their own body by giving them the chance to take a small amount and slowly ramp it up to see what happens to them. Because, we've actually done some research projects now, and I've spoken directly to like a triple PhD who does nutritional research, and what they're looking at is genetic expression on different amounts going into the body of these super nutrients that are becoming available in the market. And as they do the research, they're finding that if you put too much of a super nutrient in your body does an inflammatory response, and it actually goes counteractive. You will have a negative expression rather than a positive genetic expression. And they're looking at biomarkers and all those things that they're watching and monitoring. And I said, isn't that interesting? Like, this all happened in the last year. So he said, yeah. He said, people, if you tell them to do too much of a concentrated product, they could get they'll go the other way. So anyway, I can't go to somebody and say, okay, we've spent $100 million and done the research to tell you exactly how many drops per, we've done 1,000 people and we have this average and this many drops per day. We just say, look, we know that 1 drop has an impact, very positive impact. 2, maybe even more, maybe 3 more, maybe 15. You can handle 15. You're going to do awesome. Because most of the people over the 5-year period were putting 15 drops into their system every day. That was the average. But we're still learning on this. So I think each person can go on their own little adventure with this and just experiment and try it out and patiently find that perfect balance for themselves and read their own body.
Wow. Well, I'm great. It's so awesome that you actually brought this up, that you're not pumping this product and saying, hey, you need to take 2 dropperfuls every day or 6 dropperfuls, and to inspire people to take more and more and more. And that's our basic mindset here in our modern world, is that if 1 drop is good, 2,700 drops must be awesome, and I'm going to overload my system. Whereas you're saying, no, let's just take a step back. This is very simple science, because it actually sounds almost far-fetched that an individual can get such great results, dealing with psoriasis in just a matter of days, taking a couple of drops. But if people understand just real basic science and understand that a tremendous amount of illnesses that our bodies outpicture, or that our bodies send us these warning signs, are due to deficiencies. And to have something that's so bioavailable and have access to that to fulfill those deficiencies and start to give the body what it's actually been requiring for quite a long time in some cases, it's amazing how your body responds. And it literally impacts you at a cellular level. And as you mentioned, we're talking about actually impacting our DNA. And our DNA is printing out proteins and printing out the version of ourselves all the time. And it's so fascinating. One other thing that you brought up, when I definitely want to talk about this now, is that stabilization process. And, what makes Oceans Alive so much different from all the different phytoplankton products that are out there? So what's going on there with that stabilization process?
Okay, well, that's actually what ended up happening was a combination of ideas that were given to me that I was allowed to use, given permission to use, and I simply combined ideas that other people came up with. So my idea was just to combine their ideas, which is like wonderful because I'm not a scientist. But I had these gut feelings on stuff sometimes that I just, you know that there's something up and you're not really sure why, but you're going to do it. And I was told when I first got into the raw food thing, because I did raw food for like 3 years before I started to explore and try various other things, and kept raw food as a real kind of a foundation for what we do, which will always be the case. But anyway, the raw food key is if you could grow a sprout, for example, and harvest it yourself, having grown it, and consume it within 15 minutes of harvest after it was unplugged out of the life source, you're going to get the most benefit from that nutrient because all of the life force energy is still there, didn't leak out yet. So, we wanted to have a garden and go and harvest the lettuce and the greens and various things out of the garden and have it within 15 minutes. Of course, that just feels fantastic and when you do that. And so we went through the whole juicing sprouts and eating sprouts and salads and having our garden, and now we're on a farm, and we understand that if you go to an apple tree and pick the apple and eat it right there under the tree, you're going to get the most benefit. So that was in my mind. And what happened was there was a company that was producing a marine phytoplankton product and selling it through an MLM back in 2006 when I first started to hear about marine phytoplankton. And I watched a video of this guy who had a fish farm who claimed that he totally cured cancer in his body, some rare form of lung cancer, and he got rid of it in a matter of weeks consuming raw marine phytoplankton. But yet they wouldn't sell the raw marine phytoplankton. They would take it and dilute it in this fruit juice and sell it for ridiculous amounts of money. And on the bottle was 37 milligrams in the whole bottle. And they still sell that product today out there in the market. People can find it. To me, it's just fruit juice. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't deliver marine phytoplankton. So I bought it. It was very expensive, and I thought, that's just kind of crazy. I want marine phytoplankton. They said that in the video. That guy was eating raw marine phytoplankton. And so then when I investigated to get it, no, you can't have that because, it goes rotten right away if you leave it sitting out, and you'd have to refrigerate it, and even then it will consume itself because it's got enzymatic activity, and if you freeze it, it wrecks it, and all this kind of stuff. So I thought, whatever. So then the next thing I found out, they were doing a totally different production type with a single strain over in Europe, and they were turning it into a freeze-dried powder. So I got some of that. I was very excited when I found out about that. So I get this stuff, and I tried it, and it felt pretty good. But when I found out later, I was taking way too much of it, and there was no need, and it was freeze-dried. What we've now learned is that a freeze-dried powdered marine phytoplankton has a 60-day shelf life when it's in a bottle or in a capsule or sitting in a bag that's shipped to you. 60 days from the time it's produced. And the problem, the problem with that is not that it's 60 days it's expired. It's expiring every single day on the way to 60 days. So, and it's expensive. This stuff is extremely expensive to grow. It's extremely expensive to buy in that form. And so these people were buying it and reselling it online, and they still do it to this day, where they sell powder, and they've had that powder in stock for 2 years. They'll keep it in a vacuum pack. If you keep it in a vacuum pack, it actually lasts for 2 years, as long as it's not exposed to sunlight or any kind of light at all. It'll sit in a vacuum pack for 2 years. But keeping in mind that every day of those 2 years, that thing's on a sliding slope down as it's losing its efficacy. So, again, the farther you are from fresh harvest, the worse. So anyway, this guy calls me up. I bought the powder. We made a little website because I wanted to sell it locally in Toronto. This is way back at the beginning of 2007. So we built this little website, and a guy from California calls me up, and he goes, "Hey, man, I saw this thing online." I said, "How did you find that so fast? We just put that website up like a week ago." And he says, "Well, I do this park domain thing, and I find," he said, "this weird thing is when you park a domain, all the relevant information that you're looking for based upon the domain name that I parked shows up on this website automatically without me. He says, it's just my little way of doing research. So I said, that's a pretty cool idea. He says, yeah, no, I'm really interested in this marine phytoplankton. He says, I got an idea that I could share with you how you could stabilize the powder, because the powder has a shelf life, right? And I said, yeah, it does. As far as I knew back then, it had a long, long shelf life. There was no issue about 60 days because I just didn't know. And we had this powder. So he goes, yeah, no, if you do this such and such a thing, it'll stabilize it and it won't go off, and it'll actually last forever, as far as we know, like for years and years. And you put it in this special liquid. So he puts me on the phone with this company that has this concentrated ocean product. And it's taken from the ocean, and it's ocean water with the sodium chloride that naturally is taken out through evaporation and wind over a 6-month period. And it's like this super elixir from the ocean. And whatever you put in there, it stabilizes and preserves indefinitely. So they were doing like stinging nettle juice, fresh concentrated stinging nettle juice that they were putting through a press. They would put it in there, and they had bottles that were 10 years old that still smelled and looked and tasted the same as they did 10 years ago. And they knew that the exact percentage was, and they shared that information with me. And so the idea was to put the powder in there. So I thought that was pretty cool, and we were going to proceed with that. And then about a day later, I was just thinking to myself, I thought, why would we do the powder? I should find out if I can get access to the concentrated raw material prior to freeze drying. We would do that, because that's the stuff that I want. That's the stuff that guy ate that he said cured him from cancer, which it did not cure him from cancer, as we discussed earlier. It doesn't do that at all. He just happened to have a response where his cancer went away. But that's irrelevant. But the point is that it's the fresh harvested raw. So anyway, to make a long story short, it took several months of going back and forth with scientists telling me I couldn't do it and how it would never work, to me finally convincing some that would cooperate if I paid for everything. And we did a mini production run, and then they wouldn't let me sell anything. They kept the samples in the lab for a few months to ensure that this stuff would not go off based upon the preservation technologies that we were presenting. So that became our intellectual property. And we have an exact percentage that we use, and there's a certain time you have to put it in immediately after harvest. You've got to be all ready, and you've got to do this whole process. And so we got it nailed down, and it took a couple of production runs to actually perfect that. But nonetheless, this product was perfectly stabilized. So what happens is when you put this together, these two components together, it makes that marine phytoplankton cell that is perfect in every way. It goes in there, it puts it into an environment where it cannot oxidize, it cannot deteriorate, it cannot get infected with any kind of bacteria or any pollutants. Of course, there's no pollutants or anything like that to start with in there. It's a super purified bioreactor where it's grown with no environmental contaminants getting in, et cetera, et cetera. It's all sealed off from anything. Anyway, I'll get into that in a second. But to try to make a long story short, because this is all complicated, the end result is that when you take a drop of Oceans Alive and put it into your system, it is identical to you standing right beside the centrifuge where the harvesting is happening of the fresh marine phytoplankton and putting it directly into your body. All the life energy is suspended in a dormant state inside that. And we have actual bottles from 5 years ago that we kept samples from every single batch run, of course, because you have to keep samples. They all look, taste, and smell the exact same way as the day they went in, as the day they were produced. So we have validation and proof of this product. So that's where the stabilization thing is, and I don't want to reveal too much more because that's our intellectual property. But that's the bottom line, and we know that that's why the people get results from this product so quickly.
Wow. So it's in suspended animation, basically, and preserved. Mm-hmm. That is profound. And as I mentioned, I've been utilizing it for many years, and it's one of those things where it can sit there for a month or so, and it's just like when I first opened it up. That's been my experience, even though you do recommend that people store it a certain way, which we can get into in a moment. But what I want to do first is let's go back, because we both mentioned the fact that we're getting presented here with this marine phytoplankton some parental fatty acids, some omega-3s, omega-6, omega-7s, omega-9s. But what's really important, especially for a lot of people who are part of this community, who are really taking on a vegan approach, lifestyle, a vegetarian lifestyle, and those that are doing everything else. We've got a wide array of people, but for those individuals who are concerned about where can I get the stuff from my neurological system really, the DHA, the EPA, those things that are really essential for our brain functioning. And we're aware, in the plant kingdom we have omega-3s. However, we're mostly getting things like ALA, and our body takes a very rigorous process to try to convert that into EPA and DHA. There's stuff that we really, really need. And as a matter of fact, from what I've seen in the studies is that it's actually less than 5% is actually getting converted and becoming that stuff. Whereas, if we get ourselves onto, that's why fish oil is so popular, krill oil and these things like that. But what I want to ask is there actual DHA and EPA found here in the marine phytoplankton?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you look at the marketing world, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's all based upon what nutrients can be made for the least amount of money and sold for the most amount of profit. Okay? And DHA, unfortunately, fell into that category in the worst way possible. So as we have seen the development of various DHAs being promoted by high-profile so-called natural doctors and different people out there, we've also seen in Asia where they figured out how to make an algal oil, they'll call it an algae oil, where they take a marine phytoplankton, not the one we have, but one that produces a large amount of DHA, and they ferment it. It turns out it's all genetically modified. And they ferment it with no sunlight, feeding it sugar to produce massive amounts of DHA for next to nothing. They take that and they put it out there, and they were making people sick nonstop. But the promotion of it was like, you need DHA because 60% of your brain is fat and 60% of the fat is DHA, and you better get DHA in your system or you're going to have brain drain, and your brain won't function right and your heart won't function right without a large amount of DHA. Well, that DHA is important. I'll grant that. But the body has the structure of your brain is intact. If you didn't have a good amount of fat in your brain, you wouldn't be able to function. What you want to do is make sure that it's the right amount. Not too much, not too little. We've seen people take too much DHA and they walk outside in the sunlight and everything turns white, because they've overamped it. Or they get genetically modified inflammatory responses from these incorrectly produced DHA products. So what I learned is that the EPA, which is the functional essential fatty acid for brain, nervous, eyesight, and heart health, is the crucial one because the functional is a fuel that you need day in and day out, and you don't need very much of it. It's a small amount, but you want it in the parent essential oil form. That's the plant form. It just so happens that the amount of EPA produced in this particular strain of marine phytoplankton is the highest percentage of EPA out of any of the algae in the world, or any plant for that matter. So it's not like an ALA that you have to convert over. Now, EPA will convert to DHA easier than ALA. So the percentages are good. But the main thing is when it's structural, once your structure is intact, you don't need to keep adding it in there. But what you do need is that fuel side of it. So the EPA is the crucial parent essential fatty acid, and it's in its original state. So every time, this is something that I learned as well, which surprised me. Every time a nutrient is consumed by something living, 90% of the efficacy of that nutrient is utilized or used up or burnt by that which consumes it. So if you look at the ocean, the parent nutrient is marine phytoplankton. The next level up is a plankton, or a zooplankton they'll call it. That consumes the marine phytoplankton because it's a very small species consuming a microscopic species. And then you'll get the krill consuming the zooplankton, and then you'll get the fish consuming the krill, where a blue whale will only be able to consume krill because the marine phytoplankton goes right through them and they won't even absorb at all. But every time that zooplankton eats the marine phytoplankton, 90% is lost, but it's accumulative, right? Because it's losing 90%, but it's accumulating. And then the krill eat the zooplankton, 90% is lost, but it's accumulating. And it's still in a phospholipid form. So the essential fatty acids in the marine phytoplankton are a phospholipid. There are phospholipids in the zooplankton. There are phospholipid in the krill. When the fish consumes it, it turns into a triglyceride, changes form. So everybody realizes the fish oil is the cheapest thing to get because they're harvesting fish for the fish industry, for meat. Why not just squeeze their brains and get the oil out of there and sell it for, because it's so cheap to get, and we can market way up, and we can, it goes rancid, it goes this, it's like triglycerides, basically. To me, it's better than nothing, but it causes an inflammatory response, and better than nothing is not cool. So you could have something that's okay, and then something that's good, something that's great, something that's greater, and then you have the greatest of all. Well, you might as well just go to the greatest of all, because good, great, and greater gets in the way of greatest all day long. And that's been our premise right from the beginning. Why have a middleman when you can go direct to the source? So when I can get a parent essential oil in the original nutrient of the earth that started life on the planet, and I can get that directly myself, and I don't have to worry about the 90% drop-off on how many layers between me and that nutrient, I get to pull in the 100% value from that, and it's never been tampered with, it's never been touched. That's the one I want, and I want the one that's the fuel for the brain, the nervous system, the eyes, and the heart, rather than some extract through another animal or something else. So anyway, that's how that ended up working. So when you're talking about parent essential oil, that's way beyond what most people have realized, and certainly I had to learn all these things as I went to get to the heart of the matter, so to speak, no pun intended.
Wow. I've never heard it framed like that, to actually look at it from that perspective of good, greater, great. What we really want to do, obviously, is go right for the greatest, and that which has the closest resonance with the human body and what we're actually looking for. And then, obviously, because the concentration is there, we're going to actually be able to get so much more from that. And the last thing that I want, because this has been like the definitive guide to marine phytoplankton today. People go back and they listen to this. They've learned like a university level education about what's going on with marine phytoplankton and what the processing is of an exceptional product. And actually, it's an extraordinary product on how to actually get this from the ocean to our bodies, from the ocean environment to our bodies. And that's not an easy process, and I really appreciate, Ian, that you took the time and the years of research into creating a product like this, because, again, it's had a great impact on my life. And, I've had the ability to work with thousands of people, impact the lives of tens of thousands of people. And it's one of those things that's always been there. It's been a staple. And I've seen tons of anecdotal evidence of people experiencing all these different health benefits due to this. So the last thing is just, are there any tips that you have for getting the most out of the Oceans Alive product? You mentioned mixing into water. Is there anything else that people can do?
Well, no, pretty much it's just putting in water or coconut water or juice of their favorite type. The main thing is to get it into your system every day. But you did trigger another thought that I wanted to bring out, and I don't want to take too much more of everybody's time, but this is actually really cool stuff. I talked earlier about 4 oceans, and I'm not talking about Atlantic Pacific. I'm talking about 4 specific ocean applications that come all the way down to your environment. If you look at the Earth, you've got the ocean that the original strain was taken from, that we talked about earlier from all the research. So you got the never tampered with strain of Nanocleopsis gaudatana, isolated and kept alive. That is put into an ocean on land. We had to figure out, the technology took from 1982, when that Nanocleopsis gaudatana was discovered, until 2002, just to figure out the technology to put an ocean on land to recreate a perfect ocean, where marine phytoplankton would go into a natural spring bloom using sunlight and CO2 and minerals from actual ocean water in order to proliferate a spring bloom and harvest it. That's the second ocean. The third ocean is when you harvest it from the centrifuge as a super intense paste. This paste is so thick, I've eaten a mouthful of it. I don't recommend that to anybody. I overamped my body so much by doing that, I will never do it again. It's like chewing thick bubble gum. That's how thick this stuff is when it comes out of the centrifuge. It's this mass, this biomass of living energy like I've never experienced. That goes into the third ocean, which is a super concentrated ocean sea mineral fluid that instantly puts it dormant, right? Okay, so now you've got a bottle of Oceans Alive. That's the third ocean. The fourth ocean is you, because they know that the electrolytic fluid in the human system is 3 times diluted ocean water. When you cry, you're crying 3 times diluted ocean water. When you pee, same thing. When you sweat, same thing. So what you're doing is you're introducing into the vast ocean of the universe inside your body the original nutrient that started life on the planet to go into your environment internally, in that internal universe, and just basically flood a nutrient throughout that whole system to be used wherever you want. And it flows through the ocean of your body. So there's your 4 oceans. And I went, man, is that cool? Every single thing about this is all to do with the ocean. If we didn't have it on the earth, we'd all be gone. How important is the ocean? And yet we ourselves are an ocean. So it's just one of those things that sort of settled into my mind one day. I actually woke up one morning, not that long ago, and those thoughts came into my mind, and I realized what we were actually looking at. So now, so then to answer your question on the simplicity of it, the simplicity of this is you can take this anywhere you want. This little dropper bottle can go with you. It requires no refrigeration. It can sit. It's in an amber bottle, so it's not sensitive to sunlight. It can never go off. It can never go bad. It is always fresh, living life energy flooded with, right? The moment you put that into your system, now when you put it in water, you don't let that sit around. It doesn't like to sit around. Because as soon as you put it in water, it completely rehydrates those cells to come right back plump. You see them under the microscope inside the Oceans Alive? They're like squished up little cells just waiting to be released into a hydrating environment so that you can consume it. As soon as you put it back in, it goes right back to the original way that cell looked like under the microscope, fresh from the bioreactor. So if you let it sit in a glass of water for a day, it'll go off because marine phytoplankton does not like to sit around. It wants to be consumed. So you consume it immediately. It's just like when you pick an apple, you eat it right there off the tree. It's the same deal. And the taste, some people, they get turned off by the taste because they're just not used to it. Other people go, hey, I love this stuff. So it's an individual preference. Some people put it straight under their tongue. They think, I got to have it under my tongue to get it sublingual, to get the most benefit. They may be right or not. I don't know. All I know is that no matter where you get it inside your body, it's going to get into your cells and it's going to give you a benefit. So, that's kind of like the long version of a short story.
Awesome. Ian, thank you so much. And I can just say that it's amazing in coconut water for me. That's my favorite delivery mechanism. So, as a part of this community, we want to be proactive at making sure that we have these important health insurance policies, basically, by utilizing the most powerful nutrition in the world. Being noble beings, we want to eat noble foods. We want to eat the most positive, life-giving foods that are available, and this is surely one of those, and it gets top billing for me. And, I've been using this product before I even had the honor and privilege of meeting and working with you, Ian, and to actually have the space here to share this information, to discuss these things has truly been an honor, and I appreciate it so much. So, and also for the Be Well Buzz community, Ian has never done this before, but he's offering a discount right now for a limited time. We're going to put it with this podcast for Oceans Alive Marine Phytoplankton. And again, he has never done this before, so take advantage. Get yourself some Oceans Alive, and also I'd recommend get some for somebody you care about, and you guys track each other and monitor, what results each person got, because it's, from what I've seen, it's different from each person to person. So I want to thank you again, Ian, for coming on, and I appreciate your work so much.
Yeah, likewise, Sean. It's been really a pleasure working with you and talking with you. You ask pertinent questions because of your knowledge and your base that you're coming from, and that's a major key. You've helped a lot of people, and you experience it yourself. You don't just talk about something; you actually live it and you experience it, and that's why the vibe. You can't fake that. You cannot produce that. You are that, and that's really cool. And as far as the discount, the reason I offer it to the Be Well Buzz community is because of a long-term friendship with Larry. And I've known Larry. We've done a lot of things with him over the years, and he's always been really loyal and to the people. He's always looking for the best thing for people. So we're offering a 10% discount, and we already have a special price on this promotion to start with. but an additional 10% is like, we're honored to do that, and we think that's our privilege to offer that to this list.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Ian. And everybody, take advantage. This is Sean Stevenson. We're signing off from Be Well Buzz, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening. Go to www.bewellbuzz.com for more natural health information and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. Don't forget to share this podcast with your family and friends. Stay tuned for more from Be Well Buzz.